UF has an advantage that very few people are talking about for next season. And I am going to talk about it today. Obviously, with the toughest schedule in college football, UF needs any and every advantage that they can get this season. So this one may end up helping the Gators. Bill Conley of ESPN ranked all 134 teams returning production, and UF is in the top 25% of all FBS teams. So that's pretty impressive, right? Now, returning production not only factors in the guys that were on the team last year, but also transfers into your program. So guys that are going to be new to your program this year, but have experience wherever it was that they came from. So and I would consider those seasoned guys. So I think that makes sense that they're factored in there. We are number 32 overall. We return 68% of our team. 39th on offense, which is about 70% of guys have taken snaps before, and 41st on defense. So 66% returning guys. So why does this matter? Why is it important? Well, continuity for one, right? You're talking about guys who majority played in this system last year, knows the expectations from Napier, knows the kind of systems that are run at UF, knows the plays, all of that stuff. So that is going to be important. You also have continuity between guys too. You have relationships with the person standing next to you. You have your friends in the locker room. You can push each other. You can challenge each other. You work well together. You do, because that relationship exists. All of those things are really important. You understand the speed of the SEC game. You know what it's like to travel to these different huge venues. You know about the rivalries. You know about the history. All of those things matter, right? They are all a factor in whether or not a team is successful on Saturdays. Now, Florida only plays 2 teams this season that have more guys returning, which is also interesting because Florida plays arguably the toughest schedule in the country next season. Texas A&M returns 72% of their team, and most of that is offensive guys. So, that's going to be an early game in the season. We're going to circle that in red for a lot of reasons. We'll get to that in just a minute, but they return more production. And then Texas, who, we know that Texas was a top team last year. They return a lot of that talent, 70%. So another team that's going to present a challenge. So that means that the rest of our schedule has less returning production. Miami sitting at 66%, Georgia at 65%, LSU at 63%, Ole Miss at 61%, Florida State at 58%, Kentucky at 52%, Tennessee at 52%, Kentucky at 49%, UCF at 49%, and Mississippi State at just 41% returning. So we're going to talk about where this helps us the most. But first, I want to give some love to Meldon Law, who has supported this channel for a long time now. We have a giveaway coming up with them soon, so stay tuned for that. But first, watch this quick clip.
After the car accident, your personal life takes a toll when you have major injuries. Being a mother of 3 kids, having to work, it became overwhelming. Didn't know what was going to be my outcome, but Meldon Law actually, they went above and beyond.
At Meldon Law, we're not just your legal team, we're your support system. You do not have to go through this alone. At Meldon Law, we won't back down.
I appreciate Meldon Law. There is a link to follow them in the description. If you're hurting now or in the future due to any sort of accident, give them a call. They have offices in Gainesville, Lake City, Ocala, and Fort Lauderdale. So they are all over the state and they can help you out. Okay, so let's talk about the early games on our schedule. These are games that you really, really, really need to win before you even think about the second half of the schedule. Florida opens the season against Miami. Now, Mario Cristobal is in the same situation as Napier. 3rd year. Really good recruiter, but the wins just haven't been there as Miami had hoped that they would be. This is pretty similar to the story for Billy Napier, right? He has recruited very well so far at Florida, has yet to be able to get over the hump win-wise in the first 2 seasons. We're hopeful that that changes into year 3. This is a home game. This is being played in the Swamp. In my opinion, it is the biggest game of the Billy Napier tenure so far. Circle it in red. It is a must win. This is a team that we fight for recruits with all year long. We will continue to. If we want to keep the pipeline to Florida from South Florida, you've got to beat the University of Miami. It is a must win. Game 2 is Samford. I don't think that returning production, not returning production, any of that matters here. It's Samford. It's enough said. All right, game 3, the Gators travel to Starkville to take on Mississippi State. Mississippi State returns only 41% of their roster. This is the lowest number of any team that Florida will play this season. It's early in the season. We know that teams that are young, are new to playing with each other, generally struggle in the beginning of the year. So this Mississippi State team, week 3, could look very different in weeks 10, 11, and 12, but Florida plays them in week 3. That, in my opinion, makes this a must win because you are on paper very, very overmatched, right? Or they are very overmatched. This Florida returns a lot of talent, and this is a must win for Billy Napier. If you can't figure out how to beat Florida or Mississippi State, who only returns 41% of your talent, how are you going to have a chance against Texas returning 70% of their talent and better talent at that? Game 4, UCF comes to Gainesville. This game is a must win for a lot of reasons. So first of all, UCF only returns 49% of their roster. They are in an interesting position right now because they just recently made the jump to the Big 12. Their roster is probably comprised of some guys that are Big 12 talent and some guys that were not Power 5 conference talent, right? So it's kind of a hodgepodge in there. They have done decent in the transfer portal, but 49%, that means that more than half of their team has never played a game together. Add that they're traveling to an SEC venue. It's early in the season. This is a game that Florida should win. Now, numbers completely aside, we will never hear the end of it from the UCF fan base if Florida loses to UCF. So help us out, please. I don't want to hear about this for a whole nother year. Game 5, Florida travels to Knoxville, one of the toughest places to play in the SEC. I think that Tennessee is a team that is on the rise, although I feel like I've said that the last several seasons. The beginning of the season is usually rougher for them than how they finish. They return 52% of that roster. They are currently under NCAA investigation. We do not know if there will be some conclusion to that by the time this game plays. I think that this is a game that Florida needs to continue to win. I have said since Billy Napier was hired that your record against your rivals will get you fired quicker than your overall record. Now, Florida beat Tennessee last year. That was not a game that many expected Florida to be able to take care of business in, and they did. But they've dropped games to other rivals. So to help Billy Napier's win percentage here, he needs to get that victory against Tennessee. All right, next game on the docket is Kentucky. You cannot drop another one to Kentucky, particularly a Kentucky team that is only returning 49% of their roster. So again, another team that the majority of their team will have never played together before the start of the season. This is about the midway point of the year, right? This Kentucky game. It's in Gainesville. This is a team that you at one point had a 29-game winning streak against. You cannot drop another one to Kentucky. In my opinion, and I don't know if this is going to count for a whole lot, but dropping this many in a row to Kentucky is a fireable offense to me. Kentucky is not a team that we considered a rival in the past, but I think you kind of have to add them to that category right now because of how many times that Florida has lost to them recently. This is another must win for Billy Napier. Okay, so then at that point, you are 7 games into the schedule. You're into the back half of it. You've got Georgia at Texas A&M, LSU at home, Ole Miss at home, and then Florida State. All of those teams are challenging, right? Ole Miss returns 61% of their production. LSU 63%, Georgia 65%, Texas sitting at 70%. Okay, these are all going to be incredibly difficult games. So if you don't figure out how to pull those wins out of the first half of the season, I don't know how you can expect to pull any out the second half of the season. I think Florida really needs to be sitting at 6-1, at worst case 5-2 heading into Georgia. But if they could be eligible before heading into Georgia, that would go a long way. Last year, this team went 5-7, but they could have easily been 7-5 or honestly, even 8-4. Think about the few games last year that they were just a couple of plays away from. Even the opening game against Utah, you don't make a couple absurd special teams mistakes, you potentially pull out a win in Salt Lake. The Missouri and Arkansas games were incredibly maddening. Those are the definition of snatching defeat from the jaws of victory, right? I mean, just absurd. Florida should have won at least one, if not both, of those games. They were right there. And even Florida State, that was an incredibly easily winnable game for the Gators. We were playing with our backup. They were playing with their backup. Florida was in that game until the end. There was some boneheaded mistakes that cost Florida a winnable game. You cannot make the same mistakes going into year 3, not with this schedule. They have got to do better on special teams. They have got to stop the momentum-killing play calls. They cost Florida last season. And, at the end of the day, returning production is not going to be the end-all, be-all for the Gators. They are still going to have to execute. Bill Conley is very clear that having a high returning production does not always translate to more wins. But overall, he has seen consistency with teams that have more returning production and how they have improved, and lower returning production teams have regressed or taken a step back. So how much are the Gators going to improve in 2024? Well, that, my friends, is the $1 million question. But they do have some unique advantages heading into 2024 that can help them take steps in the right direction. So I am hopeful that they will do that. I appreciate all of you for tuning in today. And as always, go Gators.